Hello everyone. In this video, I propose to examine very briefly with you a topic, a theme, a concern which is now attracting greater attention than before. And that's the phenomenon of brain drain. This, of course, is a very overworn cliche. We used to hear talked about brain drain regularly, say 40, 30 years ago. Then there was a lull, and again it has started. So it's desirable and it's natural that we try to clarify our thinking on this important symptom of the state of our society. The first principle I want to state is that given the chance, nobody wants to flee from one's own place of birth and growth. From time immemorial, in all cultures, in all periods of history, people have attached tremendous spiritual bonding or spiritual affinity to one's homeland. Homeland is as important as one's home. Then why is it that people are desperate to leave one's place of growth, one's homeland, one's dear and near ones, and go to distant places? When I think of this topic, a very disturbing visual comes to my mind, and it has continued to haunt me ever since I saw it on television screen. The Americans were packing up from Afghanistan. The decision to vacate or evacuate from Afghanistan was quite abrupt, effected by President Biden, and there was a sudden outburst of anxiety. And the visual I have in mind is that of a military plane, a large military plane, to which thousands of people were clinging just in their desperation to get out of Afghanistan. They were all Afghans. Afghans were desperate to get out of Afghanistan. Now that's an image which is very appropriate to thinking on the subject. Let me also introduce another image because it's usual. It's helpful to think through images. Normally, water flows downhill. Suppose there is a lake at the bottom of a mountain or a hill, even a hill. You pump that water and the water will go uphill. Not because it's the nature of water to go uphill, but because you're pumping it. So it's not the natural condition that makes the water go uphill. It is the pressure that you've generated that makes the water go uphill. Brain drain is something similar to this. So rather than talk about brain drain, we should actually talk about the conditions that young people find insufferable, or conditions that induce desperation in young people, which force them to resort to this desperate remedy of leaving one's place of birth and growth. Now, obviously, there are various reasons why people leave the homeland, either for short durations or for forever. Now, when I used to be in St. Stephen's College, I used to watch this, that a very large proportion of the students from St. Stephen's who went to universities in the United States, the UK and the continent, but fewer on the continent, a very large proportion of that never came back. Many of my colleagues who went to do their doctoral program in American universities never returned to the college. So this is a widespread problem, and we need to understand this issue in its truth. I know that we are living at a time when truth is considered very inconvenient. It irks people when truth is told, but nothing else helps. It's impossible to live surrounded by a tissue of falsehood. Now, one of the main reasons why young people go overseas is to seek and avail themselves of quality higher education. Now, rather than find fault with this, and I've heard some politicians, especially in Kerala, denouncing this trend, which embarrasses me no end, because these very politicians have failed miserably in creating adequate facilities for providing quality education at the higher education levels to aspiring youth. And then you blame them for running away in search of higher education. This is highly irresponsible, besides being very unfair. So we have failed miserably in the sphere of higher education, and we have therefore generated, like the pump generating the pressure on water down below to go uphill, or the Afghans trying desperately to flee from their country or escape from their country by holding on to an aircraft which they themselves knew could not carry them. Such is the level of desperation. Young people go overseas, often straining their economic resources. It's prohibitively expensive to study overseas. In spite of this, they go overseas, and the pressure for that is generated not by them or their parents, it's generated by the society as a whole, particularly by the politicians, for whom education is the last priority. In fact, there are many politicians who fear education. They may not say this in the open, but it's very evident in terms of their policy priorities, policy formation. The allocation for education is the last priority because nobody wants quality higher education to spread in this country. Of course, if you give them a microphone, they will be very, very eloquent and say that education is the main engine of development in this country, and we are determined to develop this country, demographic dividend and all kinds of things. But actually, when it comes to deciding the allocation of money, they'll cut the allocation to education. So I'm not at all surprised. Now, you take a list of the leading education institutions in this country and see how many of them figure in the list of the top 200 education institutions in the world. That will tell its own story. There are thousands of colleges in this country where it is absolutely not worth it to study. And I say this with confidence. I will leave alone undergraduate education. In the process of recruiting teachers for St. Stephen's College, I've had to interview at least 1,000 PhDs from various universities in India. I can tell you that I used to be appalled at the very, very poor standard of these on paper, highly educated candidates, PhDs, who cannot express a simple idea. And I used to be shocked. So given all that, it's quite natural that people want to go overseas, particularly because education is just about the only means for self-improvement in this country. So I won't blame the young people for leaving their country, because patriotism is good rhetoric, but it is bad breakfast, bad lunch, bad dinner. You can't live on patriotism. Patriotism is a fashion, and those who talk about patriotism are not patriotic. If they were patriotic, India would have been very different, and nobody would have had to run away from India. But there is another aspect to this, and that's really what I want to talk about. All these other aspects are talked about by others. Why should you and I waste our time repeating what others are parroting all the time? There is one aspect of this issue which nobody is talking about, and I want to draw our attention. I want us to stay focused on that. Therefore, that's all I propose to do through the rest of the time in this video. Now, in order to get into this issue, let me introduce a similar situation, because it's helpful to think analogically, using an analogy, a comparison. Think of an institution like Christian Medical College, Vellore. That used to be the institution where very highly qualified doctors were paid a pittance for a very long time. Now, salaries have been improved and all the rest of it. But for the 25 years that I used to be associated very intimately with Christian Medical College, Vellore, The faculty used to be paid about 50% of the salaries that their corresponding cadres used to be paid, say in the medical college in Pondicherry. And yet, nobody thought of leaving the institution. So what I want to emphasize is that it's not always money that motivates people to look for greener pastures. To assume that dogmatically is to take a very cynical view of human nature. Money is not everything. There are other things actually far more important than money, and that's something I discovered very clearly through my long and intimate involvement with Christian Medical College, Vellore. What was it that kept people glued to CMC Vellore? The situation is now changing. That tells its own story. The one thing that held people glued to Christian Medical College, Vellore, was a tremendous sense of solidarity, a sense of community, sharing a very profound mission, the ministry of healing. And ministry of healing understood spiritually, which inspires people. And therefore, the fact that they were paid much less than what they should have been paid, or much less than what their counterparts elsewhere were earning, did not bug them. They served with great devotion and enthusiasm, without grumbling, without harboring any sense of underprivilege, without feeling that they were being exploited. I remember a study being conducted on the attitude of particularly of the doctors in Christian Medical College, Vellore. This was done around 1999, 2000, at that period of time. And one of the questions raised in that study was, do you feel that you are making any sacrifices by serving in Christian Medical College, especially given the fact that salaries are so low? And to the great happiness and surprise of all of us, a vast majority of the respondents, they were all doctors from the same hospital and medical college, they said we have no sense of deprivation, we never feel that we are making a sacrifice, because being part of this community of healers, where a tremendous mission is going on all the time, great values are affirmed through day-to-day work. It's such an ennobling and inspiring experience that the supposed loss in terms of salary, the low salaries that we are being paid, it doesn't bother us at all. So that's what I'm saying, that to assume that people are leaving India because they want to make more money, mega income, etc., is to take a very cynical view of human nature. Human nature has got another dimension, a more idealistic dimension, which is quite capable of accepting a life of sacrifice, provided you present to human beings a goal, a shared mission, which really inspires them. Therefore, my submission is that young people are feeling increasingly disenchanted with life in this country, in spite of all this great noise, this drumbeat of great national excitement, the new India being created, great things are in the offing, we are on the threshold of something unprecedented, India is going to be a superpower and all the rest of it. The reality, the ground reality is different. Young people know this. They can't be fooled by all this, smoke screen of words, and they know that their future is bleak. So there has been an exponential increase in the number of people going overseas for higher education. And these people are going not just in search of higher education, but they're also going in search of opportunities to settle down elsewhere in the world. And that is important for us to realize. Now, that is a reflection of their reading of how India is shaping. Now, if you remove all your blinkers and look at the quality of our national life, the quality of relationships, the sense of nobility, the idea of a shared destiny, the idea of belonging together, the idea of contributing to nation building, the sense of belongingness that one has vis-a-vis one's country, without which the idea of homeland makes no difference. It's a home where you don't belong. I mean, it's a contradictory idea. To call a place one's homeland without a very strong sense of belongingness, being homeless in one's own homeland, is a very pathetic and painful state. So, on the one hand, the degree of alienation that people are feeling is increasing day by day, and everything is being done, unfortunately, to intensify it. Manipur being the latest example, but that's not the only example. And it's not just one party. Now, for example, take Kerala. Here, even the Catholic Church is at the forefront of poisoning the society with the virus of alienation. Orchestrated attempts are being made to pit the Christian community against the Muslim community, to awaken communal conflict. And all these attempts, which are orchestrated in full public view, are read very carefully by the young people, and they know these are danger signs. They know that the stock of humanity is suffering serious degradation in this country, and that augurs very ill for the future. In a country where the quality of human relationships, where the ethical sense is declining, where the idea of belonging together and building a common destiny, a context where the individual is not encouraged and enabled to grow and develop to his uttermost, and then thereafter be able to serve the society with devotion and distinction, or a society in which individuals in their tens and thousands feel inhibited, alienated, or a context of life in which fear lurks all the time, here and everywhere, like in some of the novels by Franz Kafka, in particular The Trial. How do you expect people to retain their sense of idealistic commitment to that society, that country? Especially, I tell you, young people are particularly sensitive to the various signs of moral decay. Unlike the grown-ups and the elderly, who very readily and very happily coexist with hypocrisies and contradictions, young people demand consistency, they demand honesty, they demand transparency, and today's youth insist on calling a spade. Therefore, I am not surprised if they feel that they need to go elsewhere. I am not saying that this is a solution. I am not saying that this is an ideal solution. In fact, I am sad that such a situation arises at all. But the problem for this perceived social malady, or if it's a malady, does not lie in decrying this tendency, because you are responsible for creating the tendency. You are actually pressurizing them to fall into this pattern, and then you're denouncing them. The change must happen not at the level of these young people who go overseas in search of education. The change must happen at the level of the thinking of the people who are holding the reins of India's governance, both at the union level and at the state levels. Responsibility must also be assumed by religious leaders who could have played a very positive and redeeming role in shoring up the moral cohesion of our society, without which life in a society becomes dull, drab, and sometimes even scary. Part of the blame must also be apportioned to the media, which eagerly participates in this process of creating a very cynical worldview by showcasing all the time all the aberrations and devaluing whatever little good things are happening in our society, assuming that nobody is interested in them. I've had conversations with editors of major publications in this country. They say, we are not pastors like you, we are not priests like you. If our newspapers are to be read, if a magazine says are to be read by people, this kind of masala is the only thing that sells. Blame must also be apportioned to the opinion makers in all other sectors Together, we are creating a situation from which young people have concluded that the best they can do for themselves is to seek their pastures elsewhere. Dr. Johnson, the literary giant of the 18th century, who was a little contemptuous of the Scots, the English always looked down upon the Scots for historical reasons. Dr. Johnson used to say about the Scots that the only prospect they have is a high road that leads from Edinburgh to London. So if the Scots are to make good their life, they have to come to England. They have no scope in Scotland, right? So this is a problem, there's a pattern everywhere. Constructive nationalism is building your country on the foundation of collective health and enthusiasm, eliminating every trace of alienation that various sections of the community could feel, providing to all a sense of hope and enthusiasm to participate in this great national adventure of building a healthy country together, with equal right and opportunity to share the fruits of development. And whatever is happening today is a far, far cry from this. And therefore, I would expect that this particular trend, if people are at all concerned about it, will only aggravate in the immediate years ahead. I hope to God and I wish to God that some change happens, that remedial actions are initiated, that there is a sense of national reform and regeneration, and people recognize the dangerous paths that they've adopted, they change their minds, they return to the ways of sanity and living together in harmony and wholeness, then of course we can discuss this theme again on a pedestal of normalcy. Right now that doesn't exist. As of now, there is room, there is logic, there is motivation only to leave. Don't call it brain drain. Call it by any other name. Maybe call it the flight of young people or whatever. But it's not brain drain. It's not something that just happens. It is something that is forced upon young people, and those who do so, those who create contexts and reasons for young people to leave their homeland, straining their resources in search of reasonably good standard of education and possibly better career opportunities thereafter. They are responsible and they have to answer for it. Thank you.